order, and welcome to today's session of the Science, Innovation and Technology Select Committee, where we will be looking at mainly at data security across government, following a series of high-profile data breaches, in particular the 2022 leak of data on Afghans who worked with the UK by a Ministry of Defence official, which raised serious concerns about on this committee about data security across the public sector. We will be following up on our correspondence with various parts of government, the publication last August of the previously secret Information Security Review, and a hearing that we held with the Information Commissioner last October. And we're very, very pleased that to hear how government is responding. We are joined by two ministers this morning who represent four government departments. Dan Jarvis MP from the Cabinet Office and the Home Office, and Ian Murray from DCIT and DCMS, as well as two officials leading work on this critical subject. In the intervening time, a number of other issues have arisen, which we'll also be looking to discuss. And in fact, we're going to start off with one of those, phone theft, and I'm going to ask Kit to kick us off.
Thank you, Chair, and for the purpose of the wider meeting, I draw attention to my entry in the register. Minister Jarvis, perhaps you could clear up something that has mystified the committee. In your role, you're in the thick of the discussions with the mobile phone companies around encryption, and obviously put in enormous effort on behalf of the crime-fighting community in that regard. So why then is the Home Office so reluctant to similarly go into bat on phone theft, and in particular the barring of phones, or requiring Apple and others to bar phones from reconnecting once they're reported stolen?
I should probably say, Chair, I'm here in my capacity as a Cabinet Office Minister, but I'm mindful of your point about four departments being represented.
But you're also the Minister for Serious and Organised Crime.
I am.
Right. And,
yes.
And this is a serious and organised crime issue, we now understand, in that there are large criminal organisations having these phones stolen, put into large batches, sent across the world, mainly to China and to Algeria. We know this from the connection records. We had the mobile phone companies and said to them, there's a very simple solution here, which is you make the phones worthless by not allowing them to reconnect to the cloud in other parts of the world, which they could do with the flick of a switch. And they said they wouldn't. Why wouldn't the government force them to do so?
Well, I think the government needs to be taking every possible measure to design out of crime. We're doing a huge amount of work on the issue of serious organised crime in more general terms. I'm the Minister responsible for the National Crime Agency. We're in the process of setting new strategic objectives for them, and you'll be aware of the government's intentions around police reform, which I think provides a very valuable opportunity to restructure our police forces in order to deliver the maximum effect and the best operational capability. There is ongoing relationships across government with tech companies, and where there are technical solutions that would be advantageous in terms of reducing criminality, of course the government would want to proceed along those lines. In truth, it's not something that I've personally been involved with my serious organised crime hat on, because I think it sits within another government department. But I can give you an assurance that across different government departments, both in terms of DCIT, certainly from the Cabinet Office and the Home Office, we'll want to work as closely as we possibly can with the tech companies to achieve the most successful outcome.
Can we at least extract an undertaking from you today that because the Metropolitan Police came to us with a sort of cri de coeur, a cry for help on this issue, one phone being stolen every 8 minutes in London, 55 million quid's worth just disappearing, balaclavaed gangs on bikes roaming the streets looking for opportunity and creating a sense of mayhem and disorder. And they came to us basically pleading for our help. We got the mobile phone companies, or certainly Apple and Samsung, the operating system companies, in front of us reluctantly. They declined huge word salads around everything they're trying to do, all the rest of it. and yet there is this simple fix. If the Met come and see you and say, Minister, please can we have this, would you, given that it's a serious organised crime issue, as much as anything, are you willing to say yes?
I think you make an entirely reasonable point. So there is a division of labour within the Home Office between myself as the Minister responsible for the National Crime Agency and Minister Jones, who, as you'll know, is the Policing Minister. So primarily she has been the lead for this particular issue, but I'm very happy to take it away and discuss it with her. I think you make some entirely reasonable points, but it is her lead, not mine, so I'd want to consult with her, but be very happy to come back and provide a fuller response.
We were informed that we would be raising this today. Did they not communicate that to you?
I wasn't aware that you were going to raise it today, but it's an entirely reasonable point that you're seeking to make. But given the importance of it, I'd want to give you a more considered response. And given that the policy lead is Minister Jones in the Home Office, not myself, I think it's not reasonable.
We've obviously been in
correspondence
around this issue,
for about 9 months now.
And said no, and we wanted an explanation today, which is why we briefed your officials that we'd be asking these questions. We don't understand. This is why I said we're mystified. We just don't understand why you wouldn't just say this is an easy switch to flick, to say that we can make these things worthless in the hands of a thief. We're going to do it in the same way that you know, as I say, the effort you're putting into encryption, into dealing with the problems that encryption present for serious organised crime, that seems, laudable, and we understand the conflicts of this. But this, we just can't see it.
I think you've made an entirely reasonable and powerful case. I wasn't aware that you were going to raise it with me today. I would want to consider it back in the department with my colleague, the Policing Minister. But I'm very happy to give a commitment that we'll come back to you in writing as quickly as we possibly can to respond to the points that you've made this morning.
When you say consider it, sorry, just a final question, what reason would there be for not doing it, do you think?
I think, as a former minister yourself, Mr Malthouse, you will understand that given that I am not the policy lead for the matter that you were asking me about, it's not unreasonable for me to consult with the person who is, rather than give you a kind of response on the hoof, which is not my way of doing business. You seem frustrated at my response.
Because we gave prior notice that we were going to ask. We expected the machine
because I was not given
to allow
notice.
you to come and say, yes, we'll do it.
Yeah.
We were hoping there'd be a win for the consumer.
Well, I'm very sorry. I wasn't given prior notice that you were going to get into this particular line of questioning. As I've said, I think you make a reasonable case, and I'm making a commitment that I'll look very closely at it when I get back to the Home Office with the Policing Minister and come back to you as soon as we're able.
Okay, so could we ask, because we've been at this for some months now,
yes, just to
the
add,
problem
Kit,
continues to accelerate.
Kit, can
we ask for a deadline to come back, like 2 weeks?
A couple of weeks, I think, is not unreasonable, but again, I'm making the point that I am not the policy lead for this particular issue, but you've raised the case this morning, which is entirely within your right to do so. I'd want to discuss it with the Policing Minister and with colleagues back in the Home Office. I think 2 weeks is not an unreasonable deadline, so let me give you a commitment that within 2 weeks you'll get a substantial policy response from the appropriate Minister in the Home Office.
Thank you.
Well, we appreciate that commitment, Dan. Just to underline the frustration of the committee, we've had correspondence with two Home Secretaries on this. We've had a commitment to a mobile phone summit which would address this, organised by the Home Office. Our most recent correspondence from the Home Secretary indicated that summit is not going to take place, and instead put it back on the Metropolitan Police having discussions. Technology is something which is so powerful, and this is a way in which we can use technology to immediately benefit consumers with regard to one of the most expensive things that they purchase. And we are at a loss to understand why there is so little clarity on what the barriers are and why there is a lack of action.
Fair enough. I mean, I completely accept your point about the importance of technology. Let me raise it with the Home Secretary. In terms of the correspondence that you've had with her previously, let me raise it with the Policing Minister, and we'll come back within your 2-week deadline.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Kit. So let us go now to data security across government, and in particular the Information Commissioner's Office, which in response to the the February 2022 Afghan data breach, decided not to investigate not to open a formal investigation, which obviously it has the powers to, but decided instead, the reason it gave not to open a formal investigation was that it wanted to work with the ministry. Can I ask Dan Jarvis, was the ICO right not to open a formal investigation?
I think it's necessary for me to provide a bit of context and to make the point that the Defence Select Committee are looking very carefully at these matters. And I know that you will have noted the statement from the Defence Secretary in, I think, July of last year. I think it's all...
Clear, I wrote to the Cabinet Office in response to that statement, so we do have some familiarity with the context, but I'm happy for you to summarise it again.
Well, I think it's also worth making the point that in September of 2023, the McIver review of data protection within the MOD was commissioned by the Department's Executive Committee in response to the incident that you refer, and to other previous incidents as well. So this was conducted by Neil McIver, who, as I'm sure you're aware, was then the Chief Data Officer at the Department for Education. That made a number of recommendations which the MOD has since worked to implement. Luke Pollard, our ministerial colleague in the MOD, wrote to the Defence Committee setting out the details of this review. Of course, as our collective departments would be expected to support that process, and we will continue to assist that committee with their inquiries in relation to this particular incident. Do you want to add anything to that?
I mean, I think the Commission, so I'm Vincent Devine, Government Chief Security Officer based in... Vincent Devine, Government Chief Security Officer based in the Cabinet Office. I think you discussed at length with the Commissioner himself the pros and cons of his approach to partnership with departments, and also the particular reasons why he felt it would not be particularly useful to open a new investigation or indeed issue a new fine in response to the 2022 breach. And he drew your attention to the investigation which I think his team led in 2021, following a series of broadly similar, not the same, but broadly similar breaches involving, inter alia, blind copy addresses being used wrongly. He also explained that he'd issued a fine, I think, in that case. His approach to the Arab breach, the Arab incident, reflected both the investigation he'd carried out, his team had carried out in 2021, but also the new partnership approach he was developing with the government. And I think that the short answer to your question is that the right approach for the ICO to take. I think that really is a question for the ICO. From the government's perspective, and from my team's perspective, moving to a relationship of partnership rather than opposition with the ICO is obviously a good thing. There is a wide range of experience in the ICO that we can draw on if we move to a truly partnership approach, and we've drawn them earlier in the process rather than following an incident. There's a relationship that will benefit the ICO too if we move to a more trusting relationship. We will share information much more openly, not just notifiable incidents, but also, for example, near misses. And the committee may have seen the MOU that we've now signed with the ICO, which does commit the government to a really quite radically new approach to the relationship with the ICO. So I would say the Commissioner's decision on that particular incident, which, as I say, he spoke about at length, and I know the committee has strong views on it, in that wider context with previous investigations into MOD in a broadly similar area, in the same area for broadly similar reasons, and the wider context of partnership. So it's not a direct answer, was it the right decision? I mean, I think you understand where I probably come from on that, but I think it's really a matter for the Commissioner in due course, in a couple of years, to see whether that was the right decision to take.
So I think, just to recap, the breach which was revealed last July involved a spreadsheet with 18,000 lines of information, highly sensitive information, personal details about Afghans and others who worked for the Ministry of Defence and whose lives could be put in danger. So there was then there had been a series of other breaches, as you mentioned. The ICO decided that working with the Ministry of Defence, having already worked with the Ministry of Defence and having already committed to delivered a report with a number of recommendations, that was a better means going forward than issuing a fine. And so I suppose my question is there effective working with the ICO, between the ICO, the Ministry of Defence, and across government in order to improve information security? Is that your view?
I think that, first of all, there was clearly a very powerful and I think it's effective, it could be in the circumstance, response by the MOD to that particular breach. That was both the immediate response to protect the individuals to the extent they could, and the wider review that the MOD Executive Committee, I think, commissioned from MacIver. And we know, and the ICO knows, that those measures recommended by MacIver have been taken forward quite vigorously. So I think that general response to the MOD...
Your view is generally that, yes, you are working well...
To your direct
No,
question.
well, you didn't, but can I just... So you are working well together? Because you seem to be implying that we won't know that for another couple of years. You think that there is progress that's being made in working with the ICO, just to reassure us?
Undoubtedly.
Right. Undoubtedly progress has been made. I think we'll go into some more detail as to what that progress might be. Minister Murray, in November you told us, this committee, that government data is pretty secure. Is that still your view?
Yeah, I mean, very much so. I mean, obviously the incidents that you've opened up with are incredibly serious, but given that government shares and uses data billions of times a week, government data in the whole is very secure. And in addressing your first question, really, in terms of that security, a relationship with the ICO through the MOU is a real step forward for the whole of government. This isn't as an MOD issue now in terms of the way forward. So it's these incidents, while incredibly serious, are in the government context of data very rare, as serious as they are, but they've set in motion a whole series of events, including the MOU, including the reviews, and including how we're now resolving those across government. We now have our new chief data officer across the whole of government, and this is about governance, it's about consistency, it's about security, it's about interoperability, and it's about tooling up people to make sure that you can de-risk incidents that may happen. I think it would be wrong to suggest from your question that all data will be 100% secured forever, because human error is very difficult to take out of the system, but the whole point of the MOU with the ICO is to work in partnership to make sure we have the best possible systems to reduce the risk as much as possible.
Right. The Information Security Review had 14 recommendations, or 14 actions, actually. Can you tell us how many of those have been completed?
13 and a half, I would say, if not all 14, on the basis that there is still some technical meetings to take place with regard to the governance structures. But in the sense of those recommendations, all of them have been implemented, and actually we've gone further in some areas.
Sorry?
I don't know. We've gone further in some areas in terms of cross-government. Aimee, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so since October last year, we've accelerated a package of measures. So we've taken those 14 recommendations, and don't forget, those recommendations were back in 2023.
All to be completed by January 2024, I think.
Yeah, so now they're all implemented. We've accelerated other packages of measures across government to enable us to have a much tighter grip centrally about what progress we're making across all departments in terms of protecting data and introducing security measures into all of the departments.
Now, Ms. Smith, I think your role as Chief Digital Officer involves, if I have it right, yes, it says working closely across government to drive innovation and champion better access to data, supporting more informed decision-making and improved public services. It doesn't actually mention data security or data hygiene or data management. So is that part of your responsibility?
Yeah, so just for the record, I'm the government's Chief Data Officer as opposed to Digital Officer. But yes, it's an explicit accountability that I have in my role now, which is one of the package of measures, which is you now have a single point of accountability for the coordination of data protection, compliance and risk. And that will be my responsibility to make sure that government departments are aware of what they need to introduce in terms of the people, the process and the technologies that will mitigate as far as we can data protection loss.
So do you believe also that government data is pretty secure?
Yes.
Now, do you...
Sorry, what's critical?
Well, I think Minister Murray
but is that
said...
very?
But I think it's not 100%, because I think it would be incorrect and inaccurate to suggest that all government data would be secure forevermore.
I'm just trying to get
in every aspect.
It's not 100. Where is it? 90, 80, 70? Where would you pitch it?
Well, I don't think it's about pitching, because it's about making sure that you have the procedures in place, the accountability, the governance, the technological solutions that protect the data as much as possible across government. We are pretty secure, and that's why I used the word pretty last time. I wouldn't want to put a percentage figure on it, because it would be wrong to say 100, because you could never say with great certainty that you could secure every bit of data forevermore, because human error comes into this, and in fact the Afghan data breach and otherwise were human errors that we're trying to mitigate through technology, governance structures, technology, and
I think during the sessions I hope we will try to get a more more detail on what pretty means, and I did because I think it's a really important point. I did want to also to follow up with Ms. Smith. The Information Commissioner said that cultural change is needed across the public sector to give data protection greater prominence. Do you agree with that? And is that your responsibility? And how are you hoping to achieve it?
Yeah, it certainly is a critical factor in terms of particularly reducing human error, which is the one thing that is the most difficult thing to mitigate against. I also think culture is about accountability and where we place accountability for data protection and where it's discussed. So it's my responsibility to make sure that those who are accounting officers in government are aware of their responsibilities, and that I report to them on how cross-government we are doing and where departments need support.
So how are you changing the culture? Is every permanent secretary raising this within their department? How are you changing the culture?
Yeah, so there's a number of factors. So if I go from top down, if that's okay. So permanent secretaries themselves will be part of the transformation board. They've been written to already by Cat Little about what their actual reminding them of their, so this is already part of their accountability, but reminding them of that, and that will be an agenda item that's discussed at transformation board, so they will be held to account there. We have got all chief data officers across government reporting to the Chief Data Officer Council, which I chair, holding them to account for the package of measures and their delivery. So we will be jointly delivering those packages of measures and making sure that the right skills, the people and the training are in place. As GDS, we've already designed those principles and are rolling that across departments. We're also responsible for the roles that we want to recruit to in government and making sure we recruit the right roles and skills. More broadly, the training and awareness campaigns that already exist across government are being pushed out further into departments, and we've got a new campaign in partnership with the ICO to remind everybody in government of what their responsibilities are.
So how will we be able to measure this? I mean, what proportion of civil servants understand now the importance of data protection, and how will we be able to measure that this cultural change is complete? So
the cultural assessment will be made partly on the baseline assessment done last year by the Cabinet Office. So we've been asking departments about where they see themselves, what measures they've introduced, what skills and roles they've got, and we'll be able to now finally use that as a baseline.
Is that public?
I don't know, just look at my colleague.
Is this the
baseline assessment?
The baseline assessment, no, we've not made it public, but we could.
Is there a reason for that?
I'd rather look forward and respond to that.
This is something I want to get to particularly. So can you let us know why that's not, if that's not public, can we make it, it's important to know where we're starting from a particular question I want to ask with regard to that. So
Chair, with your permission, you've just add a very quick point. So you've heard about some of the cultural change and you've heard about some of the important processes. I think it's also important to make the point about leadership, that as ministers, we are accountable for the security of our information and our...
Yes. And that's why you're here before us, and we appreciate that very much.
We take that very seriously.
Yes.
So that point hadn't been made. Minister Murray and I are accountable to Parliament, to our colleagues
Yes.
in government. You keep smiling.
I'm smiling because I think that's part of the select committee, and that's why that's
It's
part of
important for us to evidence the seriousness with which we take these matters. These are not light matters. They are incredibly important and serious matters. We take them very seriously. I think it is right to say that the Afghan data incident was a big wake-up call, and as a consequence, we've seen quite significant cultural process change. But as ministers, we think it's important to provide the leadership so that there is that understanding of the importance of it. These are not just processes, these are important things that we do across government to make sure that we are best able to safeguard our information and data.
I appreciate that clarification, Minister, but how can you evidence the cultural change? This committee has people who have worked in IT, technology, including myself, and with it for over many years. Cultural change, particularly with technology, is challenging, and I don't believe I would like to see the evidence that cultural change is happening. And whilst you're taking responsibility, you're not explaining to me how we can see that.
We wrote to you in October, and I'm very happy to talk you through some of the things that we've been doing since, if that would be helpful.
I think we've heard about some of the things we're doing in terms of training being rolled out, but how is there? Is there a way in which we can see that the cultural change has happened?
So is it your point about metric of success and
yes.
how you judge that?
Yeah.
Well, it's about embedding it across government, Chair. I mean,
sorry?
It's about embedding it across government. I mean, that's the key thing. So the cultural change, of course, is a key part of that. But there's technological change that sits alongside that. It's to making sure that those safeguards are in place. So you change the culture by both behaviour, but also by practice. And putting in the technological governance structures and authority structures in terms of making sure there's those reporting mechanisms, including with our ICO colleagues in partnership. You then change the culture on that side, but you also change the culture through practice and through technological change that puts those barriers in place that people then come up against, and that then changes the way in which they do things. Human error is the big part of this, and human error can happen by mistake, it can happen by maliciousness, it can happen by a whole number of things. So putting those barriers in place change the culture by practice, by people using them.
Clarification. The reason I'm so keen to get to some kind of measure here is because there are ways in which I do not see that change, or I see that change has not happened. I mean, for example, in October, I think it is, in August, when Kat Little wrote to us, she said that, let me quote this, a large number of departments had adopted Microsoft 365 guidance for UK government information protection labelling system. So that's a very basic level of data hygiene, you know, doing what the manufacturer tells you should do to keep it safe. And only a large number of departments had adopted that. You know, not all departments. So can you commit to all departments like adopting the basic data guidance from the manufacturer and software providers?
Yeah, we've already made quite significant progress towards that. So
all government departments do that now?
Those who are on the Microsoft suite will have implemented the Microsoft.
Okay.
Are certainly aware and have either implemented it or they're getting direct support from DCIT and cybersecurity teams to do that. I think 21 departments already have accepted that guidance.
Okay, so I find that such a very, very basic. And then I was on the Home Affairs Select Committee look at the e-visa system, which is taking 8 years to roll out and is still absolutely riddled with issues around data security, such as duplicate e-visas or not having the right photographs or details on those e-visas. How does that reflect a change in data protection culture?
So I'm just not familiar with that programme. I've not engaged with it, so I don't want to comment on it.
I mean, maybe in general terms, that, from my perspective as DCIT, in terms of looking after data, I don't know the details, as Vincent says, of the actual e-visa system you're talking about, but actually it seems to me if that's an operational issue rather than a data security issue, in that sense, in terms of data leaks and what we're talking about these issues, if I'm understanding what you're suggesting.
So I think data, having the right person's photograph on an e-visa is certainly an issue of data security, as well as an operational issue. But a lot of operational issues are data security issues are operational issues. So I'm a little surprised. I mean, e-visas are the biggest digital sort of system delivery, certainly in the Home Office that I'm aware of. So I'm a bit surprised that you're not familiar with it, but maybe you could write to me with an assessment of where we are, because I do think it's important that we move on now. And sorry. Yeah, I think.
Which is not great.
Yeah, but I don't think we should belittle the seriousness of the two incidents that we've had and why we're here, in the sense of the, we're trying to put into context how serious these are, but actually how rare they are in the context of the amount of data that government holds and secures every single day, with billions of transactions, lots of data sharing between departments and internally within departments, huge amounts of personal data that moves around all the time. Government is secure, we're good at this stuff, it is secure, not belittling the stuff that happens. So I think it's slightly flippant to say, I think we're just trying to find out what pretty means. When in actual fact we're putting it in the context of where government sits on this and the seriousness we're taking these issues in terms of implementing these recommendations.
So it's incredibly important. Government has a duty beyond, I would say, the private sectors in terms of keeping its citizens' data.
Find out if you're pretty good or just lucky.
Well, it's important that we have it's important that any data breach is a huge issue, and government has to get it right all the time.
Exactly.
Particularly if we're rolling out digital ID, which is going to be the basis for government services and delivery. Government has to get it right all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's the standard that certainly I'm looking to hold you to, and any and I'll be honest with you, Minister. I haven't been reassured that is the standard that you're holding yourself to, or that standard that you're delivering.
Because obviously that is the kind of the standards that we are aspiring to achieve. That's where we want to get. But I think the point that Minister Murray was making entirely reasonably is that there is human error, which accounts for some of these losses and incidents.
Yeah.
And whilst you can put in all of the processes that you like, and you can have the right culture and the right leadership, there will be mistakes that will be made. And what we have to do is to kind of minimise the risk of people making those mistakes. And where mistakes have been made, we have to ensure that we've got the right procedures to sweep up after them. But please don't take away anything other than our absolute determination to achieve the best outcome. That's what we're all working to achieve.
Thank you very much. I think Lauren, did you want to come in briefly here before we move on to Adam?
Yeah, just briefly on that point there, so about people and culture, and as we are the Science, Innovation and Technology Committee, what are the technological advances that you've now put in place? You mentioned earlier about the additional steps you've in place. What are some of those things, and are those technological in order to protect human error?
Do you want me to?
Let me give one example. For example, if you're sending a piece of data, technology can automatically say to you if there's hidden files, or if there's hidden sheets, or if there's personal data that you might want to just check before you send it. It can give you that flag. But at a very basic level, that gives you a technological barrier, but also gives you a cultural change, because you would then go back and reflect. Like, there could be stuff in there that's hidden. There could be stuff in there that you're not aware that's in there. So there's technological solutions.
Are now
yes.
in place.
Yeah, so we're already putting in place measures. As I said, there's dedicated teams who are focused on all departments, targeting those who are struggling to implement those kind of data loss prevention measures, and helping them and supporting them. So it's not just about saying you already have this suite of capability available to you, particularly if you're on Microsoft, but actually teaching those departments how to configure their systems to enable that to be automatic. Thinking about what that means depending on the different nature of the data that those departments hold. But that advice and support and technological configuration is already there. We've already published as a government both the principles by which we want people to operate, and all 90% of departments are already operating those principles and applying them. We've got 71% of chief technology officers saying they've got data loss prevention as part of their suite, and we're helping them to configure it if they can't. And we're also now embedding the optimising Microsoft solutions into our cybersecurity offer. So that it's now starting to become business as usual, how we embed that data loss prevention and privacy enhancing technology.
Can I just add to that? Because you're entirely right to ask about technical innovation, and that is an important tool in our armoury in terms of trying to minimise and eliminate risks. But what we also have to do is focus people's human minds to try and get them to not make those mistakes, not least because there is a kind of constant churn of the workforce. So it's like painting the Forth Road Bridge. You've got to have that kind of constant dialogue with staff. So that's one of the reasons why we've partnered with the ICO to deliver an internal communications campaign, so that there is that kind of messaging constantly circulating around the system. The way in which we're seeking to do that, or part of the messaging around that, is to make the point that a simple admin error can have very significant impacts on individuals. So, for example, a domestic abuse survivor, or someone who is in witness protection. So the stakes and the consequences of making a mistake can potentially, as we have seen in recent time, be very high. So we're seeking to focus people's minds on the consequences of their actions to try and reinforce that culture of not making mistakes in the first place.
Can we be clear from the Cabinet Office position that these technological changes are implemented across government, and the Cabinet Office takes responsibility for that? Because in our correspondence with the Cabinet Office, we were told that each government department was responsible for its own standards.
So I mean, it's Cabinet Office and DCIT now, given we put the Digital Centre of Government in DCIT. Each department will have a different set of challenges and be managing a different set of data. So, for example, if you're sitting in HMRC or DWP, Artifact, you're managing quite a different set of problems. It's worth stressing.
Because we've got. Are you setting standards across government?
We do set minimum standards,
right.
And
okay.
we're available to assist departments with their particular challenge. But if you're managing, for example, HMRC's data set, you have a set of protections around that that will be different from the set of protections around email traffic between policy-based departments. Where we have technical controls in place, particularly any of these large operational delivery activities, with a really wide set of really specific technical controls around the data and who can access the data, how many records they can access, the level of monitoring that's in place for unusual activity, the exfiltration limitations. So there'll be a wide range of technical controls around those, in addition to the general Microsoft 365 controls that we have around the majority of government business. And I would say it's not just I think you used to phrase something like run-of-the-mill Microsoft 365. This is a set of specific controls that we work with Microsoft on for the UK government. So it's quite an innovative bit of work over the last year and a half to use those.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I want to move on now. Sorry, to Adam. So.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good morning all. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to kind of follow up on some of the points that we've been talking about on the information security review and a couple of other things. Minister Murray, I think probably. The Government Digital Service has talked about plans to develop a mechanism enabling organisations to share files from source instead of relying on email attachment. You know, generally, globally, there's a move towards less email attachments, more on sharing from source. Can you update us on how that's progressing? Aimee, feel free to jump in if you need.
I'll bring Aimee in, but just in general terms, I mean, government shares an awful lot of data every single day. I think we keep to emphasise that because there's enormous amounts of transactions, particularly with DWP and HMRC and the big, particularly personal data departments. So we have to make sure we protect that properly. As has been laid out by Minister Jarvis, it's our job to make sure that government departments do this consistently, but also there's training in terms of that cultural change, guidance, technological solutions that help us to do that. And so reducing the reliance on email attachments is one way of trying to take some of that human error out of the system, because you're able to build in those technological solutions at the point. It's very difficult to build in a technological solution to an attachment to an email. Does it take away the risk 100%? Of course it does not. It would be unreasonable to suggest that that is the case. But there are now a suite of products in place to be able to do that, and it's Aimee's and DCIT's responsibility to make sure that's spread out across government.
So how's it going, basically?
Yeah, we're progressing towards it. I think At the moment, what we're focusing on is making sure people know how to configure their systems to reduce human error of data loss prevention. I think the cultural change of the practice of not sharing email files is something we're still working on, but there is more than enough capability in the suites that exist, whether departments are on Google or whether they're in Microsoft, that enables them to share documents without ever having to release them, especially inside the government estate, but also external to that. We have got standards about the kind of email, what you can and can't email that are put out to departments and how they should be configuring their system. It's slightly more challenging in departments to external recipients because they're on different legacy estates from each other. But in principle, the mechanisms are there. We've put out guidance very recently towards the end of the year and are asking departments to follow them. I think the main thing about, to give you reassurance that there is going to be assurance, is that we're building the team, a team under me, to be focused specifically on data protection and preventing data protection loss, which is not a capability I think government has invested in centrally before. And so it's a real compliment to what Vincent and his team are doing around information security more broadly, but actually really making sure, particularly chief data officers and their teams, are really making sure their departments know how important this is. You know, they've already got their own capability to guide and advise. We're making sure we learn from mistakes and put preventative efforts in place to do that.
So, I think, you know, we're all pretty clear on the fact that technology exists. It's existed for quite a number of years at this point. And the culture problem that you've highlighted there certainly isn't unique to government. That's true across all departments. But, you know, we go back to this point that Kit and others have been making today about everything being pretty good. I think we need to be the shining example of absolute best practice, right? So what are we doing specifically to address that culture issue that you highlighted?
For fear of repeating some of the answers, but to try and give you some clarity and confidence. So it is going to be very difficult to measure cultural change in this regard because you're trying to measure humans' behaviour as it moves through departments. But there will be really clear indicators to us at the central teams, whether that's in Cabinet Office or DSIT, about whether shifts are being made culturally. Some of those will be, for instance, about how departments are or are not investing to reduce their legacy systems, how they are or are not applying AI to their digital heap to speed up their ability to do records management. It will be, are they investing in the right kind of roles and skills to make sure they can continue to look after data to the right level. And we are here to provide the guidance and the frameworks to enable them to do those things. So for the first time, we've got that kind of centralised coordination and assurance capability that I think before departments were looking for independently and kind of through a volunteer network, quite frankly, of data protection officers who are incredibly experienced, but are not always the most senior people in the department on data, but very skillful and very knowledgeable, same as information security officers. We've been relying on a process of volunteers to pull together a central position. You're now looking at, in us, a central position who have accountability to make that work. And I think that's the fundamental difference between what was happening when the information security review was in place and where we are now with this package of measures.
Okay, thanks, Aimee. And I guess, I think that's all very reasonable. Moving on from that, do we have any means of, technologically speaking, assessing employees move from using attachments to shared links, etc.? Can we examine, without manually reading every email that comes through the system, how many people are still attaching files to emails?
The technological suite exists to stop people attaching files to emails. And I suppose it goes back to, again, fear of repeating myself, but cultural change happens through practice, and if you're unable then to attach anything to your emails to send to anyone, then that changes the culture by practice, and therefore...
Are we inclined to put that enforcement step in place?
Well, these are best practice, and you're right, the government should be leading by example and be the very best at this stuff, and that's what we aspire to do.
Okay, so you are going to you're going to use the technology available to stop people attaching files to emails?
Well, where appropriate, but it's part of the technological suite.
I think the challenge will be a wholesale introduction of that, whilst in principle is ideal, where you have departments operating on various different legacy systems. emailing an attachment may actually be the only way that you can take information from one system to another. That's the complicated nature of what we're looking at across all of the departments and the arm's length bodies. So in principle, we would be setting out how we want people to operate, but there's going to need to be some considered support and focus and investment for departments to get there.
I think, probably we're going to have to come back to this at some later date to assess how this is going, but it leads well into my final question, which is the Information Security review, I think, has given us quite a lot of information, a lot of things to discuss and work on. Is there an intention, Minister Murray probably, to make that a more regular exercise, maybe annually, and to put regular progress reports out about it?
Excuse me. Well, there is as part of the MOU with the ICO, we committed to an annual assurance report. We haven't quite yet bottomed out what will be in that report and how it will be reported to the public and to Parliament, but that annual assurance is quite a big undertaking. It's quite a big commitment to make in partnership with the ICO, and I would hope at that point that annual assurance statement would be able to be compared with previous years and give us a progress report in terms of how well we're doing. But ultimately, as you would know, the proof of the pudding here will be in the eating, and we would hope that government data would not be, there would be no more instance of government data being leaked on the basis of what we're trying to achieve. We cannot 100% say that would be the case, but that in essence is a backstop assurance of how much progress we're making.
Thank you all. Thank you, Chair.
I'm going to go to Daniel now.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Welcome to you all. Incidentally, I think you've got a hugely complicated task. I don't underestimate the difficulty of this, not least because of the apparent fragmentation of government that we're dealing with. So, I mean, I'm pleased to hear you've got this new sort of coordinating role. I'm just fascinated to hear how it's going to work, because I mean, from my experience as a minister, you have so many non-departmental bodies, arm's length organisations. How are you going to ferret your way through all of this to find what they're doing? Do you have the resources? What's the process?
I mean, I think you do touch on one of the key challenges we face, that the government is complex and relatively federated organisation. I think the first thing is to send a clear signal from the centre. I think ministers have done that this has to be a priority for ministers, and for the minister's written to his colleagues across government on a number of occasions. Cat's made, and the Cabinet Secretary has made clear to Cabinet Secretaries this needs to be a priority. That means this is a board level, an ARAC level issue. So sending that signal down to departments is key. Setting clear policy baseline from the centre that's deliverable, demanding but deliverable, reflects the particular currency each departments. I think that's key. You setting central training and awareness. You talked about what will really change the culture from centre. All of that's key. But then driving it into the department's bloodstream, and that will come from the departments. I don't think there's any resistance in any department across Whitehall. I think we have all learned from the real challenging events of 2 or 3 years ago. But it will come from within the departments. On ALBs, this is something we talk about a lot. The arm's length bodies, that is the responsibility of the lead government department. We will reach out from the centre to support the big ALBs where they need technical advice, we need some support. But the responsibility for ensuring the ALB is behaving correctly and driving the right level of change is clearly with the department. I think that's well understood. We've looked at that a couple of times over recent years. But it will be a challenge because of the complex and federated nature of government. And also, it really is worth stressing the different operations that are carried out in different parts of government. So they're dealing with a completely different set of challenges in different departments, and we need to reflect that in our guidance.
I totally understand that point about different departments having different challenges, but also the state of the current computer systems in many departments, the legacy systems they've got, I'm sure they'd all love to upgrade them. In fact, they're saying that all the time. But there are trade-offs here, aren't there? And one of my worries is where the responsibility and accountability is going to lie. I hear what you say, Aimee, about there being accountability and discussions, but for the people on the front line, they've got a job to do, and they're under pressure. So they just want to make it work, and yet they're being stopped because the systems aren't being upgraded. Who's responsible for that in the end? And are you talking to staff on the front line, maybe through their trade unions, to actually get a genuine culture change rather than just what I think many of us have experienced in our working lives, that someone up there says, you got to do this, and you say, yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, we're all seeing the new passwords introduced, the yellow sticky on the computer to allow people to actually do their job. How do we make it real?
Yeah, so, I mean, that is the biggest challenge for any organisation, isn't it? I mean, you know, I'm only 3 months into government, but I experienced 25 years of exactly what you're describing in policing and the law enforcement sector, which is people at the centre want to introduce some technology, but they're too busy rolling around on the floor making arrests. You know, it's quite, how do you make that real for people? how do you make that real for people? Yes, sorry. But there is a reality that when you're designing frameworks and guidance from the centre, that you do it in your ivory tower because it sounds right on paper, but it doesn't translate very well to the front line. And I think more broadly across DCIT and inside GDS, we've got a couple of things that we try to use to counteract that. The first is we're committed to user research, so understanding how are people already, what are their business processes like, how are they using technology now, what problems are they coming up against. And then a real spirit of experimentation in partnership with departments or cross departments to really test ideas to see if relaxing data sharing in some regard and tightening data sharing in others is the way to change business process. It's not going to be quick on every occasion to do that, we're certainly committed to looking at business process alongside technological change, because otherwise you're introducing tech that doesn't fit business processes and people will find workarounds. So we're very alive to that fact, and that will be part of how we take forward the package of measures in thinking about the technological changes we want to introduce. But to be honest, also the cultural and people asks we've got of departments and the things they need to think about. It is hard to do it at arm's length, but I think that commitment to user research and experimentation to test what works rather than just imposing is what we're committed to doing going forwards.
And that's the coordinating role of DCIT. I mean, the whole modernising government is part of that process. And I think when you mention the sort of fragmented nature of government and our federated data systems, that's both a massive advantage but a huge challenge. Legacy systems is a huge challenge, but we're working through that, and there is money in the spending review to try and resolve some of those issues. But you're right, the biggest challenge from a cross-government perspective, which is why it's sitting with GDS and in government, including GDS local for local government services and helping our ALBs, the biggest challenge is that wholesale government coordination to make sure people are able to, within departments who are responsible for their own infrastructure, are doing that and investing in it. And that is the biggest impediment we have to delivering this across government. But it is working quite well, and government departments are seeing the massive advantages of doing this, and therefore they're on a programme which DCIT are helping them and assisting them with, including with external contractors, etc.
I absolutely applaud the ambition. Moving on, I mean, I think with the best will in the world, these things are going to happen again. There are going to be data breaches in future, and we're told that there's now, you've announced a model action plan to follow in the event of a data breach. I'm a bit surprised there wasn't one already. Why wasn't the one in place before? Is it just everybody sort of made it up when it happened?
For this government.
No, exactly. Well, I mean, you can say what you think.
So I answer that. Yeah. There are a range of different. So we've had a cyber incident management plan in place for some time from the exercise. I think we published that. We've had the procedures for working with the ICO in the case of a notifiable breach in place for some time. We've had digital process in place for some time. This is bringing those all together. Look, I'll take on the chin. It probably is a fair criticism. Why didn't we have that in place before? But we're building it now. We're learning from how we've managed these incidents in the future, because there are always several aims with the incident. One is to immediately triage the challenge you face. Second is to understand whether there are any immediate consequences for others who are working in similar areas. And the third is to learn long-term lessons. Put over that the different range of people you need to contact. We need to brief up to our ministers, we need to reach out to the ICO, we need to work with the affected individuals. I think learning lessons and putting that all in one place, we follow the same pattern each time, is the right thing to do. But should we have it in place before? I think that's probably a fair criticism, and I actually take that on the chin.
Well, I welcome that. I think what we're hearing, it reflects an adult recognition that things will go wrong, and you need to be to have it, rather than just assume it's not going to and then react when it does. Final question. You published the findings of the assurance exercise there was an assurance exercise undertaken by the Cabinet Office in October 2025. Will you publish its findings?
We'll certainly publish its findings when we come to put out, effectively its findings when we come to put out an annual assurance plan, which will be later this calendar year. I've not consulted ministers on whether we'll publish the findings of that in detail right now. I mean, I do know, I think we found over 90% compliance across government with the policies and processes we put in place. We also found a couple of areas where we were going to go and dig deeper to understand why that's not 100%. But can I take that away?
So I think I took that to be you will publish something this year, but you're not entirely at liberty to tell us quite how much you will publish.
That is what I said. I need to consult ministers.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Right, I'm going to bring Kit in briefly, a specific question.
Forgive me if I feel obsessed about trying to gauge what pretty good means. Given that you've talked a lot about departments that are on legacy systems and also, do you have compliance data that you're able to share with us? Is there any kind of RAG rating of departments? Are you able to say, there are 15,000 people in the Home Office and 10,000 of them are on a legacy system that doesn't allow us to block email? That kind of data. So we sort of, rather than assuming we're pretty good because of the lack of a breach, how do we know from a compliance data point of view? Aimee, presumably you've got that at your fingertips.
So not directly. I think what we have and what we're building is the ability to do that. That's what I think will come, certainly from a data protection perspective, with the arrival of me and my team.
What you've told us so far is kind of anecdotally obtained?
No, part of the assurance exercise.
So we RAG rate departments annually against a range of security issues. We don't publish that. So for each department we have a RAG rating across a range of different security compliance issues, and we'll RAG rate the department as a whole. We don't publish that. I don't think we will publish that because it would offer opportunities to our adversaries. Within each department I would expect them to be, in fact I'm very confident they are RAG rating the protection of their different data sets. And I would expect all the most sensitive data sets I would hope will be green or amber, so green with some risks. So there will be RAG ratings of all these sets, and the data sets that I own, I certainly have a clear understanding of the RAG rating and the compliance with processes, and that will be the case across government. One of the really useful bits of work we did over the last 2 years was clarifying, to a much greater extent than we had previously, the information assets and information asset owners and their responsibilities, and that includes understanding the risks posed to their assets, protections we have in place in the conflict risk RAG rating. So I would be confident that across departments will have RAG ratings on the security of their data.
And beneath those ratings there is hard compliance data around numbers.
It's hard compliance. This goes right back to the question the Chair asked earlier about culture and outcomes. There is compliance data. But compliance data is not necessarily the same as security. So compliance with the policies and processes put in place, it's essential. Or you could say it's necessary but not sufficient. So there is compliance data on all this stuff. But that's not quite the same as outcome data.
Can I just add a quick sentence to Mr. Zeichner's question? That the assurance exercise that Vincent talked about in answer to that question had 90% of government departments were fully compliant with data protection and security principles across government. And the 10% is what Vincent is
talking about. 90% of government departments. So 90% by number of departments or number of employees?
By department responses to the assurance exercise.
Right, so DWP, which is by far the biggest department, could be non-compliant and you'd still be at your 90%.
Well, I don't think we want to go into individual departments, but
I think that's one of the things that we do want to look at, actually.
So I'm just trying to get clarity on what you're telling us, right? Because it all, if I'm honest with you, seems a bit opaque. And I don't know about you, Chair, but I can't take any sense from here about whether the absence of incidents is indicative of good performance or whether it's just accidental.
I don't know the answer now, but we do know the answer to that question if we go and dig in the papers whether DWP is fully compliant with the process we have in place. I have an expectation, but I'm not going to guess now without checking the data. But that is 90% of the organisations we looked at are compliant with the process and policies we've put in place. But I can't answer on a specific department right now.
Yes, I think, could you share with us the compliance metrics that you have? So that 90% of organisations, and there were a list of things they were compliant with. Could you share with us what those were? Perhaps you've shared it already, and which departments were compliant or not. Can you share that with us?
Can we take that away and I'll provide advice to the ministers?
I think the point that Kit is making, I think the committee, is we're looking at measurable things, and we're trying to understand where we are now, and knowing what the compliance data is and how it's being measured would be an important part of that. The Home Affairs Select Committee, for example, heard that there were 48 legacy systems which formed the basis for e-visas, and that to go back to the discussion on operational versus security issues, that was one of the reasons why there were so many data errors, mistakes in security. So can I ask, in addition to the compliance data, or perhaps the number of legacy systems which by department, if that's something that, just let us know if that's something that you have, because Minister Murray, you talked earlier about the enthusiasm to invest in new systems. Yeah.
I mean, certainly from my perspective, I think we measured, and again, we will write to the committee, but it was around 23 or 27% of systems across government were legacy systems. I think that's been measured already. Whether or not we can supply a list of what they actually are, I would need to take advice from officials, but actually I would have no problem to share those with the committee, at least privately, so you could see those. But that figures in the public domain from.
Okay, well that sounds good. So if you move on,
which is different.
I don't know what I'm just.
May I just clarify?
Whether it does sound good or not.
May I just clarify? The legacy system is different.
It's pretty good. That doesn't sound showroom to me. I'm just trying to gauge where we are.
We're with you on that. Sorry.
Can I just clarify that the information from the legacy system issue is different from the 90% assurance.
Yes, no, I recognise that, but I'm just saying that as part of, let's have the compliance, the assurance, compliance, part of that is the assurance, and then I'd also like to see what information we have on legacy systems as well. Great, okay, now we are going to move to a slightly different area. I think I know that there's an issue that Martin is keen to raise.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for coming for us today, and moving on to a different area entirely. We've heard in recent weeks, I'm fairly sure it was Cabinet colleagues talking about in tech solutions, Britain being Britain's best customer. We've heard about building sovereign AI capabilities, and yet we see Palantir being mandated to be used across the NHS in every acute community and mental health provider, and their existing solutions to be thrown out. We've seen £250 million contract extension with MOD, because whilst the General said it wasn't tech lock-in, it was just too difficult to replace them because they'd have to redo all their tech, which is the definition of tech lock-in. Are you comfortable, Minister Jarvis, with the increasing prevalence of people like Palantir in the public sector, especially in sensitive areas of NHS and defence, let alone the trials going on within the police forces and used within the Cabinet Office as well, as I understand it, Palantir? So are you comfortable with that position?
Thank you for your question. Let me say firstly that there are, to give you assurance, robust processes in place to make sure that government contracts are always awarded fairly and transparently. As I'm sure you will understand, ministers across government engage with a range of different companies as part of international travel. And my understanding is that Palantir is a long-standing investor in the United Kingdom. Now, This government, as would have been the case with previous governments, utilise a range of international suppliers based on operational requirements, value for money and compliance with our legal and security obligations. And all suppliers are subject to a rigorous process of due diligence. So I am satisfied that we've got the right processes in place. Just to say one other thing, though, specifically about the company that you've mentioned, I think that the recent partnership arrangements that have been announced are a matter of public record. I think actually it represents a vote of confidence in the UK that we've got companies who want to work with the UK government and want to invest in us as an entity. And this will deliver very significant amounts of investment, which creates highly skilled jobs in the UK.
It may have highly skilled jobs, and I can think of 350 million or another 250 million reasons why they want to invest there. However, I'm not sure the transparency is quite as in the forefront as you might be implying there. What competitive tendering was going on in terms of the MOD expansion of the use of Palantir, and indeed the NHS expansion of the use of Palantir, which was supposed, the NHS use was supposed to have external opportunities for adding modules into that system, which I understand has not actually yet occurred, unless you can tell me otherwise.
What I can tell you is that you're asking me about contracts that have been awarded to government departments that I'm not responsible for. So both in terms of the Ministry of Defence and the Department for Health and Social Care, my understanding as part of the preparation for this session is that there are, in both of those government departments, as is the case across government, that there are robust processes in place to make sure that where contracts are awarded, that they are done fairly and transparently. That is my understanding of the circumstances of the two specifics that you cite, but I am not a minister in either of those departments. And I think if you are not unreasonably wanting more information, then that is something that we would need to take up both with the Ministry of Defence and with the Department for Health.
I'm more concerned about the security of the reliance on a single vendor across so many critical areas. This is now a critical component of several very serious areas in our national infrastructure. And are we depending too heavily on a single, what could be a single point of failure?
May I, if it's helpful to Mr Wrigley, just to maybe go through the processes here, because DCIT takes a role in making sure that government contracts are coordinated in the digital space, of which some of the contracts you've mentioned already are part of that. So we have a spent and controls process. Anything over the contract price of £5 million goes through that process, and it's signed off by ministers and approved by ministers in DCIT, whereas we can interrogate the contracts, we can interrogate value for money, we can interrogate sovereignty, we can interrogate whether or not they comply with the government's security and privacy principles, and all of that is taken into account. It's then presented back to the department, and DCIT work with individual departments in making sure that their tendering processes and also contract award processes fit in with government agenda and with those government protections. So there is a number of layers of DCIT assurance processes that sit outside each individual government department, that that would expect every government department to apply those principles, and that then comes back to DCIT in order for us to both help them shape what they're looking for and shape their contracts, but also to make sure that it's complying with all of the government policies on data security and principles and those kinds of sovereignty issues you raise.
So in terms of those sovereignty issues, in terms of the government agenda for building an AI sovereign capability, how much influence has that policy had on these contracts? And going forward, as we see the creation of a national police service, whilst we see Palantir being trialled in a couple of groups of police forces, will there be an opportunity for sovereign bids to actually look for that? We saw that the MOD contract was looking at I think you told us, a lack of competition in some categories, and MOD not even looking elsewhere for an alternative. How is that actually helping to invest in sovereign capability building within the UK?
Well, I mean, you ask a general question about the MOD that I am not in a position to answer, but I can answer from a DSIP perspective that those issues in terms of seeking market capability are part of that assurance process from DSIT, and they would be part of the report that's presented to us, and therefore there are robust processes in place, and what DSIT are trying to do is to make sure that we are embedding across government that advice and that support for government departments in the digital space when they're contracting and tendering for certain services, to have that support to make sure they're getting that right. I can't speak for the MOD in terms of how they do their processes, but I can assure you that all of these contracts would have gone through that rigorous assurance process that DSIT runs.
You do make an entirely fair and important point about sovereign capability. And clearly, with regard to any sovereign capability, the government will need to weigh a number of factors. But fundamentally, the most important factor that we have to weigh is what's in our best national security interests. Now, that has to be set against other considerations, including value for money, because we've got constrained resource. But I can give you an assurance of how seriously government takes these particular issues and how carefully we look at them. I did just want to respond briefly to the point that you made about the creation of a national police service. I mean, this is a bold policy that has been recently announced by the Home Secretary. Previous governments, and I don't sort of say this in a judgmental way, have shied away from the significant reforms of police that I think instinctively most of us know that we've needed to make for a long time. There is a huge opportunity here to look at the way in that we conduct policing operations and activities around the country and do it in a more effective, more joined up way, which will be operationally more effective, but also better value for the taxpayer as well. So that is a sort of process that is ongoing. It is a big body of work led by the Home Office to look at how we can do this. But let me give you an assurance that the absolute driving factors that underpin both issues of sovereign capability and the creation of a new national police service will be operational effectiveness and national security. But of course, as I've said, any government will have to kind of weight the value for the public purse as part of that process.
So it sounds like you're writing off UK startups in favour of an established American big player because nobody ever got fired for buying IBM.
That's an entirely unreasonable conclusion to draw from what we've both just said.
Thank you. Lauren, you wanted to come in briefly here? Yes.
Just a quick one, and just to kind of crystallise the concerns. So we are living in a globally unstable world, and I think it's the assurance we're looking that our data and data of people won't be held to ransom. And so what safeguards are there in place for companies, not exclusively with Palantir, but others, that data, our data, will be accessible, and that they would not be able to hold us to ransom or put up the price and go, well, actually, this contract now needs far more. What are those safeguards so that that data is protected and people are protected? Thanks.
So I might just say a word, and I think it's useful to let me agree with your basic assertion about the nature of the world that we're operating in. But believe me, I spend a lot of time thinking about these things, and I can give you an assurance that the world is a very challenging place at the moment. And therefore, it's even more important that we make sure that we've got the appropriate gearing to guard against the nature of the threat that we undoubtedly face from a range of different actors. In that context, the point that you make about data, I think, is important. There's a lot of work that's taking place across government to look at how we can satisfy ourselves that we've got the right procedures in place in order to ensure the security of the information that we need to safeguard. I think, though, it would be useful to hear from Vincent, because he will be able to give you a bit more detail about that.
I just think there are two things there. That whenever we contract with a third party which is going to hold our information, there will be contractual safeguards on how they must hold that information, what they can and cannot do with that information, and our own access to that information. That will be in the contract. We do that routinely. We're doing that in a couple of areas that I'm involved in right now. where we're contracting, we should also be thinking about the exit from the contract, so we don't fix ourselves to a particular company who at the end of a 5 to 7 year contract can hold us to ransom for the price. So that's a routine part of our contractual thinking. Now, what are our exit processes, and where we'll begin to break to ensure we can fully have a full competitive tender for the next stage of that contract.
So if that's the current thinking now, those contracts that were signed a few years ago may not have had that kind of exit strategy thinking and that arrangements in place for how that data can then be transferred to another company. Is that the case, or is
I think we've been aware of that risk for at least the last 5 years, but I'm aware of some contracts where we have faced that challenge towards the end of the contract, that we're relatively limited in what we can and cannot do by way of competitive tender because of the relationship that has been built with the companies. I think we're pretty wise to that now. This is routine business. I think it's part of any kind of gateway process for a contract to talk about what your exit clauses are and how you get out and how you manage your data.
If I can just come back on that, I'm very, very pleased you're thinking about exit strategies, because it's always the first question you should ask before buying a new system: how do we get out of it in the end? However, the recent MOD expansion of the services denies that entirely, because it's very clear that the MOD said we have to use this existing supplier because we can't change from what we're doing now. So they have no exit strategy there. That's absolutely transparent. It's also clear that Palantir went on to say, when challenged about certain potential uses of their system, they said, oh, we wouldn't allow our system to be used for that. So they are still exerting control over how and where that system is used and what principles are applied, whilst also claiming to be a UK sovereign company, which they're clearly not. So I think that your words are fine. I think the example of what we're seeing from the MOD in those statements don't ring true with the principles you're describing. How would you feel about that?
I mean, I know the Defence Secretary's gone on record on the point Palantir contracts, I recall reading, but I don't recall precisely what he said. I'm really reluctant to comment on a specific contract, on a specific company.
It's not on contracts, it's about the comments and the reasons why the MOD gave for actually continuing and giving that contract without competition, continuing putting another 250 million into Palantir.
I'm really sorry, but I do recall reading it, but I don't recall precisely what the reasons were, so I'm not going to offer any comment. I'm sure I would support whatever they told me.
Well, I understand there's going to be an urgent question on Palantir contracts later today, but just building on that point, the really important point that Lauren and Martin are making with regards to vendor locking and exit strategies. Now, I think the Cabinet Office wrote to me to say in July, I think it was, to say that the procurement and maintenance of official government IT systems ultimately remains the responsibility of individual departments. Now, if that is the case, how on earth can you ensure that we do not have dependence on one particular provider across government? You've spoken to us about the guidance that you offer in robust processes that you believe are in place, but where is there control and measurement of our dependence on particular companies such as Palantir?
On the government system procurement, I think that's a question DSIP might want to take. So, and the government set out in the digital state of government, and the government set out in plans for the digital government how there'd be greater control exercised from DSIP over the procurement of IT systems across government, with respecting this a Department of Decision to final instance. I don't know, Aimee, do you want to say anything more, or Minister?
Yeah, so I think where DSIT is moving towards is a whole of government approach to digital sourcing, and that is what's being worked on now. And I think it's just, I suppose, not to comment on individual contracts, but there is a tension between government departments reassuring themselves through their own DPIA process, their own ethics process, about the contracts they're about to take on for their data assets which they own, but this increasing tension between where we're trying to get to as a government, which is what is a national asset and what is the impact of
capability.
A national capability
Yes.
on that, and are those considerations taken into account when departments are looking to source? And I think that's one of the things we'll be looking to work on as we go forwards, about starting to, because we've talked a lot in strategies about data being a critical piece of infrastructure, and I think at the contracts you've seen so far are very much about departments, and I think there is a point to balance for us going forwards about a national asset and the impact of that versus a local asset.
A departmental asset, you might
Yeah.
mean. But I I think what you're saying is that you do not have control over departmental digital procurement currently, but you hope to have so in the future, or you hope by...
Anything over £5 million comes to DCIT for that assurance process, which takes into account all of the issues that we've discussed already this morning, in terms of security, in terms of vendor lock-in, in terms of market testing, in terms of issues around data protection, the laws that we have in this country around GDPR, UK security standards. That all comes as part of that assurance process, and contracts are subsequently signed off for ministers when they're satisfied with that process. But there is a...
How many times has that process been invoked since it came into place in terms of contracts being stopped or reviewed?
I don't think there's a incident that I can recall. I've been in this job since September where it's been vetoed, but in actual fact there's a lot of work that goes on before it gets to the stage of filling out that assurance report to make sure things are in place properly. So
just to give a particular example,
it's not an end of process event.
It's continuous.
It's a continual process.
Just to go quickly, before we're going to end, just give a particular example. I have tried on many occasions to find out what proportion of government data centres use, or government data is using Microsoft, or is using AWS, or is using what's the provider, and I'm told that each department knows it, and there's no cross-governmental knowledge of whether we are locked into AWS or Azure or something. So can you say to me that you have the answers to that question now, or that you will have the answer in the future, and that you can ensure that we're not having vendor locking in data services, for example?
I think your question poses the challenge and the tension and the balance between both of these issues, because if we have a DCIT are moving towards a whole of government procurement approach in terms of digital and technology, the difficulty is that if you do that whole of government approach, you end up in a situation where your contracts are cross-government rather than individually departmental. So the issues of whether or not we use Microsoft or Google or AWS or any of those vendors then becomes a cross-government issue, which may make the contracts larger and less diverse than individually departmentally. So that is the tension and the balance as a government that we have to try and...
We're asking that you are able to know whether you're able, to measure it now. Is that yes?
Yes, we are, because
you're able to measure it now. So I'll get an answer to my question.
There's a process going on in terms of procurement at the moment for some of those services.
And you've shared some of the challenges. Okay, Long, just briefly, because we've got... Yes.
Briefly, this is all about measuring and weight. So it's about the weighting that the guidance or the framework is given to sovereign capability, and the weighting that you as DCIT will be able to control, allow, and actually ensure that the weighting for sovereign data and data systems is there. Is there more pressure that we need to be putting on other departments to make this happen? Because data is a sovereign issue, and like you said, you can see the direction of travel, but we need to get to that direction of travel ASAP, really, don't we? Do you agree?
I both agree, but would just caveat that with an understanding from each individual department what data sovereignty is. Because we don't have a definition of what data sovereignty is, and therefore, what
whose
does
responsibility is it to bring to deliver that definition of data sovereignty?
Well, there's no international definition of data sovereignty, and therefore...
I think we've had this conversation before.
We've had this conversation before, yes. and it's a bit of a circular argument, or a circular discussion, because there is no global definition of data sovereignty, and it means different things to different aspects of it, each which have valid arguments for why that should be a definition of sovereignty. So it's not an easy definition.
With Lauren, that data sovereignty is an important part of a whole government procurement approach. And now you're saying that we don't understand what data sovereignty is.
But I'm saying we don't have a definition of data sovereignty.
So we must have one. Must be going to have one in order to have a whole of government.
Let me just give you a couple of examples. I mean, does data sovereignty mean that the data stays within the confines of the country of the United Kingdom? Does it mean that the data is held by each and every government? I mean, we don't. This is not an easy.
No,
thing to
I
work out
sorry, I
with a global
recognise
definition,
it's not. But I just think we want to hear that you're working on a definition, because it's been clear to the committee that it's an important part of a whole government approach to procurement, to digital procurement.
I mean,
so you're working on a definition.
Government policy is about, as Mr. Wrigley says, sovereignty in these issues.
Right. So you're working on a definition.
I wouldn't.
You seem reluctant.
I'm reluctant to say yes because it's a definition is not necessarily easy. I'm afraid to agree. Okay, so now let's because we're running out of time, and I do really want to ask about transparency with regard to engagement with tech and big tech. I think there's been a number of concerns around the Prime Minister's meeting with Palantir. I've already mentioned last February in the US and the extent to which that was arranged through Peter Mandelson's company, Global Counsel, although Palantir did give us assurances that it went through the proper channels, but Peter Mandelson was the ambassador at the time. We heard this week, or I think yesterday, that Secretary of State for Health, Wes Streeting, Peter Mandelson offered to arrange meetings with tech companies for him, and yet at the same time that we are looking, I know there's a request, to Ofcom, freedom of information request to Ofcom, just to say which tech companies they've met, which they're refusing. Can I ask both ministers, do you agree that transparency on engagement and meeting with these big tech platforms is important and something that the public have a right to? Yes. Excellent, thank you. And yes, and from a ministerial perspective, our meetings are made public through our ministerial declarations.
Well, they're made public sometimes in arrears, and it doesn't always public how those meetings are arranged. But can I say, particularly to you, Minister Murray, as a responsible body for Ofcom, that you would encourage transparency with regard to how Ofcom is meeting, how often and who Ofcom is meeting in the big tech companies?
With all due respect, I don't think it's, as we always say in these kinds of issues, it's not up to ministers to direct Ofcom as the independent regulator, but I'm sure they've just heard what you've said.
I think it's really. But can I ask you, Mr. Have you met with Palantir?
No.
And Minister Jarvis, have you met with Palantir?
No.
No. Great. So,
Palantir, as part of transparency, that is on the record.
And that is on the record. Right.
Palantir, because I've been in front of the committee as well. So DCIT looks at these contracts as they come through. The predication of these purchases are that these systems deliver what they are intended to at the beginning. I've been trying to find out through National Audit Office whether Palantir in the NHS is delivering the level of promise that was made. I remember when I was buying systems, it was Oracle would do anything you wanted it to do before it came through the door. And then the reality was never quite as good as the slick salesman always promised you that it would work, and it was a lot harder to make it deliver on its promises. Does DCIT monitor the effectiveness of these high-tech systems that are actually working in a way that no one quite understands?
Maybe Aimee can add to this, but if I could just rewind you to the start of your question when you said DCIT looks at these contracts as they're coming through. That's not entirely. That's a small part of the process. DCIT work hand in glove with government departments at all stages to make sure that the tendering processes are correct, to provide advice to government departments where they need it in terms of the process that need to go through, and in terms of giving advice back to changing contracts and discussions as they're coming. So it's not just about looking at them as they come through. There's a whole process of advice that's given and support that's given through DSIT to government departments in these types of contracts. There is, of course, through legislation, the ability through national security concerns to remove contracts and bar suppliers, if that is the case. And of course, in terms of the modernising government policy of government, we're constantly reviewing and assessing technological change in government and giving advice from DSIT. So DSIT's trying to provide an overarching cross-government support service for these kinds of technological contracts and technological change across government, and that's something that's embedding in.
Which is a good thing that we agree
it's
on.
a
That's
great
great.
thing,
But
yeah.
the question is, are you actually looking at the real measures of success? Are these systems delivering what they promised to the extent that they promised? So far, I think the only example Palantir gave us was that they had improved the rotoring of nurses and operating theatres to marginally improve the throughput of operations, which is good. Don't get me wrong, that's good. But I don't think it's 330 million good.
I can't comment on individual contracts in the Department of Health and Social Care.
I'm asking about the process. Does DSIT monitor the effectiveness of these extensive high technology systems that are supposed to transform our government departments?
No, it's the responsibility of each individual government department to monitor contracts delivering what it should be delivering.
Do you think DSIT should be taking an overall view, since it's giving an overall direction as you were just describing? Monitoring your own success, measuring your own success. I'll take that as a yes.
Well, I mean, you're asking me a question that I'm having to think through the practical implications of doing that, but I would expect that if a contract is not delivering the outcomes, particularly for some of these big contracts, that each individual government department, it was not delivering, I would expect each individual government department to take that up with the contractor. Maybe, and of course DSIT always stand ready to help government departments in terms of those kinds of issues. Should we be monitoring as a government department the delivery on these contracts? I don't know if that would be desirable for DSIT to take a whole government view on each individual contract.
Why would that not be desirable, to see whether there's something like an AI data warehousing system, which is a novel aspect to bring into these areas? Why would you not be wishing to see whether that is as successful as was promised by the slick salesperson?
Each individual government department should be doing that.
Okay.
Thanks. I think, well, so I know we're running out of time a little here, but I hope you'll be able to stay with us. I know that Lauren has a couple of questions which, Martin, are directly related to the issues that you're raising and may go a different, may clarify them a little bit. Lauren, would you like to? Moving on, yes.
Yeah. So, so this is about, and we mentioned it just briefly before, which is about the ICO Memorandum of Understanding. So my kind of concerns, this question: how are we ensuring that we're not getting too close? Well, the departments are not getting too close to the regulator. There's an advice section which is good, and the ICO should be providing advice. And there's an enforcement and kind of checking of homework section. How can we be assured that actually that's not getting too close and that there is that separation of powers and duties?
I think we should be incredibly close to the regulator. I think they've got a range and depth of expertise that we should absolutely draw on. They've visibility not just of instances within government, instances beyond government that we can learn from. So I don't worry from my perspective about getting very close to the Commissioner. So I think I met the Commissioner 3 times over the last month. The Commissioner briefed the Government Security Board in, I thought, a really impactful way. So that's senior representatives of a range of departments and our technical experts from the agencies. So I don't think from our perspective we can get too close to the regulator. I think you have legitimate questions for the regulator, having been a regulator myself in the past. Are you get too close to government? I know the Commissioner thinks very carefully about that and is very careful how we engage with it. I would like us to get extremely close to the regulator. I want it to become absolutely a matter of course that we were developing new capabilities. We don't consult the Commissioner late in the day when we think it's potentially an impact on data. we go to the Commissioner very early, right at the beginning of the process, say this is what we think you're doing, what kind of dialogue do you think we should have. So I think for government, this is a very good thing. There are risks. We're opening the cupboard. We're showing the regulator what's really there. And, you know, I would expect to get very honest and quite frank advice. So from our perspective, Aimee, I might be wrong.
No,
I might
I'm
be
totally
from our
with you, and I
perspective,
think
it's all good.
it's absolutely critical that the person who describes what good looks like is someone that we are in regular conversations with, a bit like Ofsted and schools, a bit like the Inspectorate of Policing. You need the people who are defining what good looks like to be close enough to you for you to be able to consistently check your homework against, but also ask advice about. And I think John Edwards made it really clear in the Government Security Board, the things that will be his real test for us as a cross-government capability is what goes into the assurance statement and how we will be looking to progress the maturity of government around data protection. So I think the relationship is good. I think it needs to be close. But I don't doubt that the regulator will hold us to account if we don't deliver on the things that we've committed to.
I think just from my experience in the past, seeing Ofsted inspections, say in schools or social services, that there is then a briefing back the other way, going, this is what Ofsted are looking for. Make sure you're saying these things and to ensure that we get a good outcome. So it's just keeping with all the goodness of, like, yes, let's be transparent, let's show it open. There are obviously impacts where things go wrong, and the impulse to kind of cover up and not be transparent. So what checks and assurances can we make sure that it is a case of being open and transparent and believing exactly what you say? And I can see the point of being open and transparent, because you've got the regulator there and you can have a look at what's going on. But equally, there are, human nature, and how are we ensuring and that human nature of trying to cover up isn't there throughout the systems. It's a very tricky question, I'm sorry.
I think that's more of a question for the regulator, because the regulator has a job to do in terms of holding the government to account for breaches, but actually the way we've seen this through the MOU is to work in partnership with the ICO to be able to develop the best practice that we've got, but also to get ahead of it in terms of new systems and new ways that the government may wish to work. The ICO can give us their expertise and advice on them at the start of a process, rather than waiting for breaches to happen and then coming in at the end of a process. And we all have, both the regulator and government has the same goals here. We want to be able to secure people's data, we want to use it for the public good. And both having those goals from different aspects of that means that working in partnership is critical. The annual assurance report, which may sound slightly dry, and may be a slightly dry report, is hugely critical here, and a massive undertaking from government to put into the public domain a relationship with the ICO in terms of these data issues. And I think that's a huge step forward in terms of transparency. And also in terms of the cultural issues that Dame Chi mentioned at the start of this session, being able to use instances that may happen, or potential instances or near misses, feeding that back into the process for learning helps with those cultural issues around seeing the ICO as a trusted source of advice rather than it being a regulator, a heavy-handed regulator of last resort.
Yeah, okay. No, that's really interesting. The next question I have is about the blueprint. And when I go on the website about the blueprint, I do expect to see it in blue. I mean, it's, but in terms of the plan, so last month there was 6 progress updates. Are we going to reach the end of the blueprint in terms of the progress that's being delivered in that digital government strategy?
It's a huge project. The blueprint's very ambitious, and I'm glad it's on a website and not in paper, because that shows us that we're trying to modernise government for a start. And the progress. This is a living, moving, breathing document, and I was very clear when I came into this role that the blueprint should be something that we seek to deliver, rather than it being something that government produces and then it disappears into the ether. And that's what I'm quite keen to do. And we've launched some really good stuff already. Customer First is a huge initiative that we've launched to try and make the interaction between government and citizen much better. We've just passed the 31st of January, the end of the tax submission year for self-assessment, and I'm sure there was many people looking to try and get some advice from HMRC in terms of those issues, and the first project in terms of being with DVLA is a really good way of trying to look at the DVLA systems and bring forward some innovative ways of having the customer put at the heart of those kinds of processes with government. So, you know, it's not exhaustive, the roadmap. It should be a living, breathing document. I hope it is a living and breathing document, and but my role is to deliver as much of it as we possibly can as quickly as possible, and pace is the big issue in terms of trying to get this across government. But we've discussed some of the issues already today: legacy systems, access to data, interoperability, how government departments are going at different stages. Vincent very clearly has laid out the fact that different government departments have different data strategies because they're dealing with different types of data in terms of sensitivity and wide-ranging personal data. So this is not an easy thing to deliver, but we have to do this. This is about modernising government across the piece.
You've described it out really nicely on the website. The kind of thing I wanted to drill down on is number 5, which is funding for outcomes, procuring for growth. And now the argument that we had earlier about sovereign capability and that sort of thing, procuring for growth means that we need to invest in this country and its talent. So just sort of like, how can we expand and add weight to your weighting of procuring for national interest and national talent?
I mean, again, this is a little bit chicken and egg, because yes, we want to procure for growth, but we also want to build that sovereign capability, and having the ability to be able to do both is at the same time is quite difficult. But government should take a leading role in procurement in order to give some of these frontier technologies the advantage that they might have over some. So the government should be a big customer to frontier technologies, to be able to give them the contracts they require to be able to move forward with some of the big things that they're doing, and that's a huge issue, yeah, of course.
Absolutely. So last week we had the CEO of UKRI, which are obviously a big, huge, obviously, they're not a company, but yeah. So we had him last week, and this move to a kind of a proof of concept funding. So that kind of a gap between the small startup and the small businesses to the medium and the larger space, and there is that valley of death. So, are you asking and directing him in the kind of those priorities, so ensuring that we can keep those companies here and grow them here?
And this is something that generationally we've never cracked as a country, is how you not only bridge that valley of death, but how you have the startup and the spin out getting into medium and larger businesses, which help with that sovereign capability and a whole host of technological issues. And that's something that UKRI have been tasked to look at in terms of how they get there. The difficulty is, and of course it might just be a cultural issue with the way in which the UK system works, but there is always, when someone comes in to invest in a frontier technology or otherwise, the first thing is asked, and Mr Wrigley mentioned this, is what's your exit strategy? And the exit strategy in terms of UK businesses is not to get to medium or large, it's to have an exit strategy in terms of sale and move on. So there is a cultural issue that we have to try and deal with, and some of that can be dealt with through financial mechanisms, government being a customer being one of them, UKRI investments going into some of those valley of death businesses. So there's a bit of a structural issue, but government are trying to bridge those structural issues by providing that gap funding in the middle through UKRI, and they've got 3 big pots that they would look at in terms of frontier technologies, but also in terms of the kinds of research and development that has no that's investigative.
So from speaking to some businesses here, there's a dearth of capital that's made available to them, and I think there are quite a few businesses that want to stay and grow here, but there just isn't the capital. So speak with Treasury colleagues and pension colleagues about how we can reinvest that capital.
If I can put a small DCMS hat on as well as DCIT, is to try and find those products that are most suitable for not just different sectors, but also for different parts of the process in terms of investments. So the British Business Bank, the National Wealth Fund, UKRI's funding are all part of that complicated matrix, and perhaps one of the things we have to do is not only simplify those complicated matrices, but make sure that businesses know how to access them.
Absolutely, thanks very much, Lauren. And one of the things that almost all startups say and small businesses say is that given the choice between a grant or even a loan and an order, and particularly an order from government, they'd much rather have the order from government. So that brings us back to how government procurement is supporting UK companies and diverse supply chains. Thank you so much for your patience and your commitment in answering and coming before our committee this morning. I want to follow up with finish off with just two questions, which I think just to clarify some of what we've been discussing about. You know, we've heard a lot about you're going to publish an assurance plan. We had the blueprint. We also have had the roadmap. The roadmap is only on the government website. It's a series of pages. It's not a document, so we're not going to see how it's we're not going to be able to track how it's updated. And it doesn't have any detailed measurable metrics in that roadmap. Can you tell us how you will enable us to measure success and against that implementation plan? And could you write to us actually with a list of all the plans and deliverables in terms of assurance plans and statements, etc., which we've discussed here? Yes.
Very happy to do so and lay that out in detail. Happy to do.
That's probably easier.
Can I just say on the metrics that we intend to use sort of flexible metrics in terms of this because the technology is advancing so quickly that we don't want to be tied to something that's inflexible enough to be meaningless. So that process is being worked through as we speak.
We also we appreciate that, and that's one of the challenges the Select Committee has. But we also can't use flexible metrics to escape effective scrutiny. So we have to have effective scrutiny. And that is certainly what we will be focusing on. And then we've talked about the responsibilities of DCIT in terms of ensuring high standards of data security and data hygiene. Can you confirm that the departments and public bodies that are not in compliance with the principles that you set out in GDS for securing personal data will be prevented from adding their services to any future digital ID? Will that be the baseline before which they can add services if they're not meeting GDS requirements?
The commitment in terms of digital ID is to have the most secure system and protections in place of anywhere across government, and therefore those standards are set.
Okay, I think that's kind of a yes, though I'm not sure.
Would it be 100%, not 90%?
Which is pretty good.
Pretty good, very good, outstandingly good. it'll be exemplar.
Right. I think we'll look for a...
there's no binary, you're in because you comply, you're not in because you don't. No. So somebody who doesn't comply could be part of the architecture.
I would doubt it.
Okay.
So it is possible, but doubtful.
Pretty good, yeah.
So let's get back to us with the implications of the standards that we've talked about today for digital ID and whether they'll need to be compliant in order to add their services to digital ID. I think that the committee...
I mean, clear direction is that digital ID will be an exemplar of security, will meet all the standards we set. We've also committed to working very clearly with the ICO right from the beginning of that programme. So just in case you go away worried that we're not absolutely committed to the highest levels of security for digital ID, we clearly are, and that's the direction that's been given by the Minister.
Okay, that's helpful. So it sounds like it should meet the highest standards before being a service using digital.
I think it will.
It will meet the highest standards.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a further clarification. So, but we'll look for that. Yes, in writing, and the committee's heard that our data standards are going to be an exemplar, that they are pretty good, that they can't be 100%. We will obviously form our own view as to what those standards are, but I really do appreciate your coming here to discuss this with us. It is not an easy issue. Indeed, it's an issue. It's a subject at which there has been multiple failures in the public sector, as well as in the private sector, but particularly in the public sector. So we do recognise the challenge that you face, and thank you for sharing your evidence with us today. Order.